You're 67. What do you mean you're thinking about it? And the other thing you got to understand, and unfortunately, we had this experience. My first transition plan was Josh. You've heard the name Josh. Josh was my first partner who came in 2004, 3 years after we got started. And as they always say, man plans, God laughs. Josh got sick and he passed away at an early age. So that plan didn't work out. So if you don't start planning things very early on, you'll never have time to catch up if there is something that doesn't work out the way you planned it.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Foret.
And I'm Justin Neagle, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the three pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guests are Chris Kottra and Farahmandpour from Building Technology Consultants, Inc., also known as BTC. Kami is the founder and principal consultant at BTC with over 40 years of experience in the evaluation, design, and repair of building enclosure components. He is a fellow of both the International Institute of Building Enclosure Consultants and National Academy of Forensic Engineers. He also holds multiple industry certifications, including RBEC, CCS, and CCCA. Kami is licensed in 23 states and has managed over 900 projects involving facades, roofing, and waterproofing systems on existing buildings. Chris is the managing principal at BTC with over 20 years of experience in structural evaluation, repair, and design. His expertise includes critical facade examinations for the city of Chicago, parking garage evaluations, and resolving business enclosure deficiencies. Chris is a licensed professional engineer in 3 states, a registered exterior wall consultant, or REWC, and a certified construction contract administrator, CCCA. Both Kami and Chris are actively involved in professional organizations like II, BEC, SWR Institute, and ICRI. You got more acronyms than we do in the tech space. It is wild. Super happy to have you, and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Just to be clear, I'm the old guy.
Yes, the old guy. So it'll be easy when they watch the video. They'd say, "Oh, I'm the older one." So that's it. We'll just use our eyes to know who's who. But Kami, tell us about the beginning stages here. Obviously, Chris came on later, but what was the original story when you started BTC?
Sure. So it was back in 2000, the year 2000, when I started thinking about having my own firm. And usually people have different incentives for wanting to start their own business. Driven by money, you want to make more money, you want to probably get away from politics of a larger firm, or you may want to just have a vision that you want to implement for your own company. In my case, money was not the incentive. I even remember telling my wife at the time that if we can make 70% of what I make, we can still get by and we'll be okay. So money was not the reason I started the company. What I really wanted to do was to start a company that focuses on building enclosure and get away from the office politics that I was faced with in working for it was about 120-person firm at the time. And I also wanted to be able to control the destiny of my career and be able to do whatever I wanted to do with my career and go to whatever seminars I wanted to go without having to get approval from somebody else. So that's how we got started. We got started in January of 2001 on the same day that George W. Bush was sworn in, actually.
Wow, very presidential of a day to start a business.
That's right.
What about you, Chris? Like, how did you come along? How did you find yourself to this situation?
So out of school, I started with a structural engineering company that specialized in kind of smaller commercial buildings or, larger single family homes. And I worked there for 4 years. I enjoyed it at the time, but had another opportunity with a family friend that kind of led me in a different direction. It was an interesting company that specialized, or their main clients were banks, and they did a lot of due diligence work. And it seemed like a company that was growing, and it just kind of aligned with some of my interests. So I took that job, but unfortunately, I took that in the spring of 2008, shortly before the economy crashed, and with a company that had a client base of mainly banks. Things didn't fare too well for that company, and I
Not the
did.
best environment
No,
at the
not
time.
exactly, right. And, I did make it through a couple rounds of layoffs, but I finally was let go and found myself searching for a new opportunity. I landed 4 interviews very quickly after that. 3 of them, I got job offers almost immediately. The fourth one was BTC. And that was the one I really wanted after interviewing with Kami and Josh. It was a niche industry that I didn't know anything about really until I met with Kami. And although I didn't get an opportunity right away, about a month later, I did get a call from them saying that they had the opportunity and the availability to train me, because that's one of their core, or always was one of their core missions, was to make sure they had the right amount of time to train people when they bring them on. So I started at the beginning of 2009, and I've been here ever since, working my way up the ranks.
So when you were hired, obviously you weren't hired as the managing principal
Correct.
initially. So, did you see yourself being in the position that you're in today when you?
Well, that's an easy one. No. No, it was never something I ever imagined or really dreamed of. It was never a lifelong goal. I think one of the main reasons when you're starting out as a junior engineer, you don't really know a lot, right? I mean, when you see, the wealth of knowledge that other people have, you're just down at the ground floor starting up. That, my main mission was just to be able to be, at a competent level, let alone being like at this level, or, being considered an expert in the industry or something like that. So no, it was never really an aspiration. It just became more and more of a possibility. And then Kami and Josh decided to incorporate. That gave opportunity to buy in for everybody. And I mean, it was a great opportunity. And I think that led us to get, a little further down the road where I saw that this was a possibility and possible.
Okay. Kami, this is for you. When we talk about transitions, ownership transitions, whatnot, I would argue that you are starting early. Relatively to other people that I've seen out in the industry, I've seen like 80-year-olds start this process. Okay.
Yeah.
Why are you deciding, or why do you decide to transition earlier than a lot of people, let's say, in the industry do transition? And then what made you decide that Chris might be part of that transition process?
So great questions. In my mind, a transition is exactly that. It's a transition. It's not a switch you flip and you go, I'm 65, I'm gone. You guys take over, or this other person is going to take over. It's a very, very long process. You don't not only have to transition the business itself and the ownership of the business, you have to transition your clients. You have to transition the culture in the company. You have to, before you get to that point where you can transition ownership, you're going to have to develop interest. I mean, I just listened to Chris for the first time saying he originally had no interest in being an owner or didn't think about it. One question I always ask everybody we interviewed was, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? And I think of probably 75 people I've interviewed with that question. Maybe 2 or 3 of them have said 10 years from now, I want to be an owner. Very few of them would see themselves 10 years from now an owner. So it takes 10 years for you to not only instill the skills in them to be able to take over, but also instill the interest. It will take a long time for people to understand that boy, ownership could be fun. Ownership could be beneficial from a financial standpoint or from a you know, career standpoint in general. It's a very, very long process. I always felt that if we didn't start transition when I was 50 years old, I was behind. And you're right. I talked to a lot of friends and business owners who are 65, 70 years old. I'm like, so what's your plan? They're like, well, we're thinking about it. I'm like, dude, it's too late. You know, you're 67. What do you mean you're thinking about it? And the other thing you got to understand, and unfortunately, we had this experience. My first transition plan was Josh. You've heard the name Josh. Josh was my first partner who came in 2004, 3 years after we got started. And as they always say, man plans, God laughs. Josh got sick and he passed away at an early age. So that plan didn't work out. So if you don't start planning things very early on, you'll never have time to catch up if there is something that doesn't work out the way you planned it. You always have to start early so you can recover from any unexpected bumps and still make the plan work.
I think one part, if I can add to that, that Kami's leaving off of that is, this was his baby. BTC was his creation, and he wanted to see that legacy live on. And I think his plan to do so was to make sure, he could hang around long enough to make sure that happens and that it continues along his vision instead of to, stop working immediately, like he said.
So there's the idea of how transition works, and then there's how transition actually works. We laughed a little bit about this before. Can you both speak to this? I think you both have kind of perspectives on this. So, Kami, I'll let you start first, and then Chris, if you want to add, do your part.
So, yeah, I think from my perspective, the first step towards transition is identifying those. Well, you got to decide whether you want to sell or you want to transition. A lot of people go the route of selling their business outright. And over the years, we were very successful. We had a good reputation for a small firm. So we would get calls all the time from bigger companies who said, we just want to buy. We decided very early on that's not the way to go for us because I have seen far too many times where those, a bigger company comes in and buys you and they want to change your culture. They want to change the way you do everything and things just don't work out that well. It would have been the easy way out for me to get money out of the company. But I think after that, I would have been miserable because I would see, as Chris said, my baby being handled the way I don't like to have it handled. So my decision was, we want to really transition from within. We want to create a culture where people can start buying in. And there was a number of reasons for it. Number one, it was a great way to retain people, right? People who came in here and said, boy, you're a small company, but this is the only company that I can actually become an owner in. It's a way for you to feel that you're part of the family, that you can share in the success of the company. So that was one benefit of doing transition from within. There were a number of other benefits for it too, but gradually we started to realize that, okay, we want to do it from within, and now you got to sell the idea to everybody, right? You got to make sure that people who just want to come to work 9 to 5 and go home and spend their weekends with their families and never have to worry about work, that they would see the benefit of ownership because all they hear is ownership is a pain in the butt, right? So we started to come up with a number of different ways to show people how successful we were and allow them the opportunity to see for themselves that, gee, if I own 5% of the company, this is how much difference it's going to make in my bottom line. So transparency was the first thing we did. Well, we would have meetings every year at the end of the year and we'll say, here are the numbers. This is how much we spend on rent. This is how much we spend on this, on that. And here's the profit that Josh and I took home. For two people, we probably took $1 million. There was one year we took $1 million home between the two of us. And that was very eye-opening for these younger people who are making maybe in the six figures or just below the six figures to say, wow, I could have a chunk of that $1 million going to me if I were an owner, right? So first you develop that interest in them, and then after that, you got to find a way to make it possible for them to buy it. So we came up with formulas about valuation of a company that if you had, let's say you had spent $10,000 on buying stock, your rate of return would have been 25, 30. It was pretty good, right? So they would see the value of buying it. And you had to make it easier for them to do the first purchase because a lot of them are just not saving a lot of money. They're putting money into their 4Ks. They have young families. So we also came up with an initial stage of stock purchase where the stock prices were just like half of what they would typically be. So rate of return would be 60, 70%, and they just couldn't refuse it anymore. And there were a few people who just couldn't afford it, and we would help them out. We would finance it.
Just for clarity's sake, okay, because you talked about multiple, employees. Is this an ESOP, or did you consider an ESOP?
We did consider an ESOP. ESOPs would have been great for me and Josh at the time because of taxes and everything else. There were two reasons we didn't go for ESOP. Number one, ESOP meant the company would owe money, and we were financially very conservative. Everything we owned was paid for. We didn't want to owe money, right? And number two, ESOPs are complicated and expensive to implement. They work much better for probably 100 plus employees versus us who are 12, 13 employees. We were told by ESOP consultants that it would cost $200,000 to $300,000 to set it up. And then we would have to go out and get a loan from the bank to finance the ESOP, which meant the company would owe money. And we didn't want to do that. So what we did was just a straight purchase. We came up with, our lawyers wrote agreements for purchase of the shares. We didn't have different classifications of shareholders. So every shareholder had the same rights as I did, they would be entitled to the same dividends and the same benefits that everybody else was. We tried to keep it simple. I always believe in simplicity, especially for smaller companies.
So you also mentioned one of the benefits or one of the things that drew you to opening up your own shop was the politics of a larger firm, just what that looks like. So you also were offering the fact that like, hey, you could be an owner, but you also are not dealing with that. Can you break down some of that for us? What is a big firm politics? What does that mean? What does that prevent you from doing as a leader?
It's a good question. In a larger firm, I was part of a firm it was a wholly owned subsidiary of a nonprofit organization. Okay. So even though I was called a principal engineer, I was not an equity principal. I had no equity in the firm. A lot of other people were also principal engineers, but they had no equity in it. So the incentive level was different. I also felt like everybody was just kind of racing to the top. There were too many chiefs and too few Indians. Everybody was trying to get to the top, and they were more worried about their own careers than the good of the company. I remember there was one particular individual who would happen to get an inquiry call from a big client. This was their opportunity to write a proposal, get the job, and now they manage a big project. Well, they would sit on these calls until the day before the proposal was due. And on that day, when they decide, gee, I can't have time to write this proposal, they will go hand it over to somebody else and go, this proposal needs to go out this afternoon. Well, that's people thinking about themselves, putting themselves ahead of the good of the company. And I just hated that. I couldn't deal with that. And to that end, the culture we tried to create was we tried to incentivize company performance over purely individual performance. Obviously, we want to reward individual performance, but the good of the company overall was always given a big emphasis. So we always worked as a family, as a team.
We have a saying, the greater good of the organization.
Right.
that if you just keep focusing on that, good things will come to you individually, right? Like if you just keep like what is in the best interest of us creating an amazing organization, your culture stays thick. Like obviously people increase their wages, like all these things occur because the organization is the blood of how we all survive essentially
That's
in
right.
the business sense. So what's your take on that, Chris?
Well, so I would say, talking about the structure of large companies or something along those lines, one thing that really I thought set BTC apart from that concept is I feel like larger companies have a very set organizational structure, meaning you can't advance until there's a position available. Somebody clears out of that spot, then you can move into that. One of the philosophies of BTC is to really, if you're promoted on merit, not on what's available. And you work your way up based on what you've accomplished yourself and how the company is done. And if there wasn't a position necessarily defined, they would create a position. And we've maintained that process because, I think as we look at me coming into this role, my goal was to keep things the same. I very much I was drinking the Kool-Aid on how Kami and Josh put this together. And I thought it was a perfect system, not a perfect system, a great system that I wanted to keep going, not come in and just change. And I think other, larger corporate structures, there probably would not be that kind of opportunity. At least that's my perception of it.
Got it. You didn't have to come and make the waves, right? Like you
Right.
can come and say, like, what we got going on, it's pretty good.
Well,
like,
it is. And
let's
obviously
tinker with this and that,
too.
but like we got a good thing going. Let's keep it rolling.
Exactly. It was not our intent to come in and, take a wrecking ball to it. It was to maintain it and, evolve where necessary, where the times require it, but maintain those same core values and keep going.
Okay. So not ESOP, just to circle back around to the original topic. So not an ESOP. So would this be considered shareholder financing, essentially owner financing?
Yes, it is. So we had a simple stock purchase that was financed by me personally with certain guarantees. And one of the conditions was I could work as long as I wanted to work, right? I couldn't be fired.
That's an important part of the bylaws, by the way.
That's right. But other than that, it's a relatively simple agreement. Yeah, we financed it over 10 years. I figured, I'd done my math and I figured if these people make as much money as we did, they're going to be able to pay the payments every year and still have money left over to enjoy their lives and, realize the benefits of ownership.
Sure.
Are you two the only leadership structure within BTC, or how does this?
Well, so Kami, it takes a lot.
Not leadership at all.
Yeah, Kami does. He's only a part-time employee, technically.
That's right.
You just can't fire him. It's just part of the laws.
Right. It takes a lot to fill Kami's shoes. And so really 4 of us were the ones that were coming up through the ranks to take over. And so really that ownership, there's still other smaller percentages, but really the 4 of us took over as, main owners, with the 3 of them voting me to be the managing principal in that regard. But
yeah, by the way, they asked me, who would you appoint as the president? And I said, I don't want to get in the middle of that fight. You guys are going to have to decide amongst yourselves who's going to be the president.
Boy, first major decision.
Yep.
Turned out to be not a big deal at all, though. Honestly, the 4 of us work great together and we do divide and conquer. We each have kind of our avenues to focus on. So that way there's not just one person working on every aspect. I think we're able to divide and conquer and accomplish a lot that way.
By the way, of those 4 people, 3 are the technical people like Chris and Mike Wisconsin and Charles Seidman. They are the technical consultants. And then the 4th person is the office manager. We hired an MBA about a year and a half before the transition, and she's been wonderful in just looking at the big picture and being able to be part of that management team and do it.
Right. Well,
with regard,
sorry, I was going to say she's so much more than that. She's she wears many, many hats, and that's she's the glue that kind of keeps us together in that regard. We have a great relationship, and her and I bounce stuff off each other all the time. So,
by the way, when it comes to making decisions, one of the things we did as part of the first stages of transition was Josh and I sat around and said, a manager we make so many stupid decisions every day. Where are we going to have our office party next year? What are we going to get for holiday gifts? We came up with a list of 100 different decisions like that we have to make on a routine basis. And we divided it up amongst the staff. We said, you are going to have these, 15 different things you're going to have to decide on. Your responsibility. Just don't drive us bankrupt. Don't get us into a lawsuit. As long as you do that, you're fine. And we set some budgets for certain things. And that was a very interesting process because we had younger folks who have grown up in the new education system where homeworks are done as a team, and they would hold a meeting for 3 hours to decide where the next company party is going to be. And then we would calculate how much billable time we just lost because we had that 3 hour meeting with 5 different people in it. But that was a learning experience for them. They had to go through it to start understanding ramifications of decisions, understanding that procrastination is not going to pay. It's going to cost you money. You're better off to just make a decision and go for it. And every once in a while, you make a wrong decision, but you can recover from it and keep the company moving.
I mean,
Yeah, and
time is a resource. That's a valuable lesson.
Yep.
very much.
Well, and we are in a service industry, right? We don't sell widgets. If you sell widgets, you can go golf half a day and come back and sell 1 million widgets in the afternoon, and you're still okay. We are in a service industry. We sell time and expertise, and there are only so many hours a week you could bill to your clients. If you're wasting that time making decisions on where to hold the next company party or what company gear you're going to buy next time, you're not going to be able to make money.
Figuring out all the small decisions, and if they take a very long time, then that, you can't get the big things done. So it makes sense.
That's right.
But important to have the right people, right? Right people on the bus. What's y'all's philosophy on hiring? What does that look like? Is it we take them green and we build them into the ideal engineers that we want? Or is it the opposite? Like, no, we need to have somebody that has more chops to them already when they walk in the door.
I'll tell you our first principle, and then I'll let Chris tell you where we hire these days. Our first principle was we hire when we have an opportunity to hire a good person, not when there's a job opening. We learned very quickly that when you're busy and you need more people, it's a wrong time to hire someone, because when you're really busy, you don't have time to train them. So we weren't going to hire just because we need more bodies to do work. We decided we're going to hire if we find the right person. Even if we didn't have work for them, we would let them do different things around the office, go to meetings with other people so they could learn. But if we only hired when we were busy, we would have hired a lot of wrong people. And don't get me wrong, we've still done that. So that's our first part of our hiring process and our hiring philosophy. I'll let Chris talk about who we hire these days.
Well, no, I was going to echo that, and I'm kind of case in point on that. I said I started in January 2009 when economy was down. That was not a great year for the company, but they hired me. They saw something in me that they thought it was worth the investment, and we've tried to carry that same philosophy all the way through. Where it's we're not hiring just to hire; we're hiring people that fit. Right. And we'll weather a storm that if we're too busy, we'll find a way through it and not just add people to add people. That's exactly what Kami's talking about. We've tried to carry that same philosophy. As far as where we're finding that talent, it's been a challenge of late. And I don't know if we're, barking up the wrong tree or what the case might be, but, mid to high level people, we've had a lot of trouble securing those. So we've had a lot more success actually with younger, coming out of school, and even actually interns. Several of them have actually stayed on and become full time. So I think that's been our best path right now. And I think one of the tricky things, especially when you're talking about, mid-level and higher level, and Kami would tell you this too, is that it's kind of hard to teach an old dog new tricks, right? And we have very specific ways on how to do things, on our writing skills. These are all the things that set us apart as, as experts in the industry. So to focus on those things is crucial. And so if somebody's used to a certain writing style or doing things a different way, it may be a big change for them to come here and learn those new ways and fit in the right way. It's not to say they can't, but I do wonder if that's why we're struggling with that, because we are a little bit picky in that regard. But like Kami said, we've been successful, so there's no reason to really change everything completely. But it would, our best success has been through younger engineers coming right up.
Yeah, and hiring has always been a challenge for us because we're not like a typical engineering firm, right? If you're just a typical design firm, you go to schools, people get trained on structural design or whatever. You can throw them at one of these projects and they'll do their calculations. They've been trained in it. What we do, though, is very niche.
Very specific.
And when I teach classes to architects or engineers about what we do, and I ask them, how many hours of training did you have on this topic in school? Usually it's 0 hours to maybe at the most 3 hours of training.
Yeah.
So people aren't trained in what we do in forensic engineering and building enclosure. So, but I would say 95% of what people do day in and day out here is experience based, not education based.
One thing I've
Got
told
it.
people actually, especially younger people, is, engineering school will teach you how to think like an engineer, but only experience will teach you how to actually be an engineer. Like there's nothing that could replace just having the experience of doing all this, hands-on in front of us.
Experience is king. We see that all the time where there's books behind me, books behind Will. We frequently say like, you could read a 1,000 business books, but that doesn't make you a business person unless you lived it. Like there's so much passion and conviction and understanding when you've actually done a thing compared to, well, you did a lot of schooling about this or you read a lot of books about this.
Right.
But it actually kind of brings me full circle here. So obviously, we're not trying to become a big firm. Like, we're not trying to become a big firm problem politics. However, we're adding mouths to feed in regards to profit. So you do have to, hire, get bigger, grow that way. But we're also going to not hire when we're busy. We're going to hire off busy so we can train them. It's hard to find people. How do you make a balance of all these things? Like, that seems like you're really trying to thread the needle. Perfect person, right skill level, right time, all of those things. That seems like a hard,
So that's
thing to
the
do.
reason that we've stayed small, right? Couple of things. Think about it. In service industries where you have specialties that require a lot of experience and knowledge like ours, how many people you could hire depends on how many people you have to mentor them. And, when you're our size, and out of the 13, 3 of them are admin people, you have 10 technical staff, you need about one principal or one mentor per every 2 or 3 employees. If you go beyond that, you're not going to be successful because that mentor also has to do their own work. They have their own clients, they have their own project load, and they have to mentor all these other young people and oversee their work. We have to review every report that goes out. We have licensing requirements that, if we write a report, a licensed engineer is going to have to review it and stamp it. You have all those requirements. So practically speaking, although a lot of companies do it, which is to just hire people, throw them at these jobs, and one principal oversees maybe 20 people, we have refused to do that. And that's really what sets us aside from a lot of other people in our firm, in our industry, is because we can keep the quality of work that high. We always tell clients, you're not going to just see me when I'm selling you the job. I'll be at the meetings. I'll be doing the work. I'll be writing the report. If it's testimony, I'm going to be doing the testifying when we do forensic work, right? So they get that quality of work from us, and that's how we can maybe charge a little bit more than most of our competitors and keep the quality high. But you cannot. Well, I got to take that back. There are firms out there who get very big and they have kept the quality pretty high. Honestly, I don't know how they do it, but for us, we've had to keep the firm small, profit margins higher and more comfortable. And that way you're not under pressure to take every job every time, right? We can turn down clients. We have fired clients who we don't like to work with because they either don't pay on time or their expectations are unreasonable from us. And we have said, you know what? We don't want to work for you because we only have 13 mouths to feed, right? We don't need every job out there to keep the company going. And that's the advantage of staying small and a boutique firm.
I think one of the things that impressed me the most when I was a junior engineer in my first few years here is we would compete against companies. Some of our competitors one is like close to 1,000 people, another one's like 80 people. And there's a couple more that are up in that realm too. And yet we win jobs over them. I was always impressed with that and didn't understand it until later on when I understood how much the quality meant to people and having that personal interaction like Kami's talking about. By him being involved in those projects, that's what gains us that trust with those clients.
Yeah, I think especially with engineering, quality, it's everything, right? Obviously communication, super crucial, important in any business, but like the actual doing of what you do, you have to have high quality because it matters.
Right.
Some places you buy a t-shirt, it doesn't matter as much. But when you're doing engineering, it's like it's crucial.
Especially our kind of engineering. We always joke with the clients and say, we are like oncologists. People come to us when they have a big problem. They don't come to us because they got a cold. They usually go to this, to the other tier of consultants out there. We get a lot of jobs where they've already tried that and it didn't work. So it's second, third time around, their buildings had a problem and they've tried to fix it and it just didn't really quite get resolved. So they come to us.
So I got a question then, because this is obviously very detailed, very specialized work, which requires then having a lot of one-on-one time in order to be able to get someone to be more autonomous and self-sufficient, right? How do you get people to that level of, autonomy and self-sufficiency without having to do that for decades?
Training. Chris will tell you, we have a spreadsheet for every one of our positions.
Yeah.
We have requirements on training, which goes way beyond what licenses typically require. Most people who are licensed in engineering, they're required to take like 1 or 2 days of training every year. We train a ton more than that. Number one, we encourage and in some cases require people to be involved in industry organizations. Like, Chris would go to a lot of meetings, to a lot of seminars. A lot of our people serve on these committees, whether they're technical committees or organizational committees. They're required to write papers. They're required to give technical presentations. They're required to read magazines and articles about this stuff. We have internal training where if somebody learns something new, we share that with everybody else. So we really have very, very intensive training before even the one-to-one starts. We have several binders of standards and materials that we give the person who walks into the office the first day. We hand that over to them and go, try to learn this in the next 2 months.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's overwhelming, but it's also meant to guide people in that direction. When you talk about at least, starting point, day one, we have a internal review process where I would write a report and, Kami would mark it up. And if you're familiar with track changes on Word, I would get something back that would have mostly red and very little black on it. So that was the story of my life, and all of us lived it. And we were like, man, we're never going to get this right. But it's more of a tough love approach where it's very specific on how we want to shape.
It works. You know what? After a while, you read what Chris writes today and you read what I wrote, you can't tell who wrote them. But people do learn. These things, but it takes time. It just takes repetition. It takes time. The one thing that you can't teach is the attitude that this is the right way. We've had employees who never bought into this culture, and some of them were very smart engineers, but they thought 95% was good enough. And we're like, no, it's got to be 99.9% right. I have a joke that I tell. Well, it's really not a joke. It's reality. What I tell most fresh graduates is in school, 90% is an A. In our business, 90% is a lawsuit. A building can fall down. You can work on a building that leaks again. We didn't fix it, and the client spent $5 million doing what we told them to do. It's a lawsuit. So you better be about 99.9% right.
Kind of going back to what Kami mentioned with, constant training and certifications and industry involvement, Justin, you kind of started off with, wow, that's a lot of acronyms and a lot of alphabet soup, right?
Oh, yeah.
That never stops. I mean, look at the wall behind Kami. I mean, that's only a portion of some of his accomplishments. Mine, I just bought it at Walmart for $5. Make it look like I had something important. But, despite Kami's long last name to begin with, all his certifications, he's on a second line on his business card. Granted, his last name is long to begin with, but that's what he's talking about is continue. It never stops. Always learning, always additional certifications to be had, always advancing your career and not just being stagnant. And
we love that. It's about one of our core values is continuous improvement. So it fits well in line of how we see the world and how.
Yeah, and then the last part of the whole training is be leaders in our industry. A lot of us not only obtain the certifications, but we're involved in developing the certifications for these different organizations. For years and years, I used to go out and teach classes to my peers, to my competitors on how to do our work. And a lot of people told me, why are you doing that? Why are you training your competitors? And the reality of it was that many times some of those competitors got a call from somebody who said, I have this complicated problem. They go, you know what? We can't handle it, but I think Kami and BTC can do it because I learned a lot from him. So we've put a lot of value in training our competitors, our industry, just elevating our industry helps us because now we are competing with people who are better trained, and as a result, their fees are also a little higher. We're just elevating the entire industry together.
Yes, all rising tides raises all boats, right? Like
That's right.
That's the concept, which, no, better together. I love that idea. When a couple weeks ago, we had an event and that was a big message of it, right? Bringing a bunch of architects, engineers, construction leaders into one room who could definitively be competitors for each other, especially when you're in the same geographical location. That's inherent. But the concept is like, yeah, but if you all get better, like if you all increase your level, you should see that at the bottom line. Essentially, when you roll this out far enough, that's what occurs. Everybody gets a little bit more, which is amazing.
So I want to go back for a quick second before we move forward. There was a portion that I kind of skipped, and I think I want to talk about that now because you talked a little bit about incentives and also shareholdership. And there's a concept that I'm hoping that we kind of cover, which is how do you measure, right, how well, let's say, leadership is doing in their roles, right? How do you measure that? And do you have metrics? Like, are you more of a metric driven or gut driven decision making, or the combination of both? How do you do?
I can tell you my perspective. I'm an old-fashioned business person, and for a small firm, keep in mind our philosophy is I'm involved in a lot of projects. I work one-to-one with a lot of people in the office. When you run your business that way, you intuitively will know or subjectively will know how everybody is doing. So that kind of a gut feeling and that kind of a read on what the company is doing is a lot more valuable than any metric you could have because you can pick out things that metrics typically don't pick out. Metrics will tell you how profitable you are, how much backlog you got, this and that. But in our business, we always say the goodwill of the company, the reputation is the most valuable thing we have. And we still haven't found a good metrics to measure that. So there are things you're going to have to intuitively understand about your business that I don't think the metrics can easily measure. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to come up with some AI model to do it down the line. But for a small company, for us, it's been a lot of subjective stuff. We have tried to bring in metrics a lot more into measuring performance. We have always tried to ask employees how they feel about management, what they would do differently. And one of the comments I always used to get is he doesn't communicate enough because I'm just short. I don't have time, right? Not enough time with us, or they don't say thank you enough. Those are the two common things. Chris, what's your perspective on metrics and how management success is measured?
Well, I mean, we are incorporating metrics more to get a gauge on what some of that activity translates to. Sometimes there's a disconnect. There are certainly qualities that you can only gain from that one-on-one interaction. But then once you dive to the numbers, sometimes those things don't always add up. There has to be some understanding of what's happening in the background with profitability and efficiencies and contributions to other parts of the business and not just worried about billable time. So we've tried to incorporate those, and it's 4 years in now on a new bonus structure that I think we have enough data we're going to tweak it a little bit, but it is still, partially metric based and partially subjective, criteria. So it's a matter of balancing both. But what Kami's saying is correct. I mean, in a smaller company, usually the face-to-face, you can gain a lot more or understand a little bit more about some of that interaction just on how their performance is from that.
I think to your point about there's a piece of this that is just kind of a gut feeling is interesting with leadership, because I think a lot of people miss what leadership is, right? Like, and Chris, I'm sure you can attest to this, well, both of you, but certainly now more, where it's like I used to just do a lot of technical stuff. I used to be an engineer all the time, and now I also do things that are not engineer work, where it falls in these other scope of things, like how are my people doing? Like what's the temperature of the room when we walk in the office? All those different things that, how do you say, are they feeling this, and like then doing something about it? That's not easy to say, okay, let's put a scorecard together and know if you're hitting these metrics or not.
That's
Certainly.
managing personalities. I mean, that's
Correct.
That's the psychology part of it, which is a whole other level. And I remember Josh mentioned that years ago, and I didn't understand what he meant until I was in this position, and then I got it. It's much different people. Not everybody's going to react the same way to the same thing. So there's a lot of psychology involved that I had no idea until I was here.
Yeah. No, that's leadership, right? So it's a people job. It's just how do I manage people?
Right.
But one very interesting thing that you guys do, and I know you mentioned this, 90% is a lawsuit, right? So obviously you want to do work at a 99.9% or better level. So y'all handle litigation. That's a thing that you handle, not necessarily just, because of your work, but just, hey, you come in as an expert and say, like, yeah, this is who is at fault, or, what is at fault? What's that look like? How does that work? And how does that play as you're also trying to get business to do work throughout the industry?
Well, first of all, I don't think you could be an expert if you don't do the regular stuff, right? That's how you become an expert. You can say,
That's
I've
super
done
fair.
it. I've done exactly that. I've been in those shoes. I know how that task is done. So it is great that we have a good mix of litigation work versus regular engineering work, where we go out and solve problems for building owners. I know some other engineers, I know a lot of good friends and peers who say we would never do litigation work because it's so stressful. And to some it is. If you're not confident about what you're saying, it could be very stressful. Because in a regular type of a project, you do your engineering, you issue the stuff, you're responsible for it. You really aren't going to have to answer a lot of questions about what you did, right? This is what you designed, this is what gets built. The contractor might ask a few questions here and then. You tell them this is the way it is, just do it, right? In litigation, it's not like that. You'll say something, and I guarantee you there are 10 other lawyers and 10 other experts who say, oh, no, that's wrong. Here's why you were wrong. And now you have to justify your answer, and you have to prove to them that what you said isn't just BS. It's not speculation, that you have a good reason to prove what you said is correct. And that's what really hones your skills very well. It's amazing how many standards, even to this day, I still remember certain standard numbers or certain standards because I've had to read the whole thing to make sure that when I say they violated this standard, they did violate that standard. You learn so much more by doing these high stress litigation projects because 99.9% isn't enough. It's got to be 100%, right?
Yep.
You took me back to my days of when I was in a classroom, and now I realized I connected the dots between proofs and proving
Yeah, there
why
you go.
you had to do that. I totally just connected the dots just now after 2 decades of being out of school.
Well, look
Okay,
at
thank
that.
you for that.
More lessons taught by Kami. Look at that.
Yeah. We'll send you an invoice for that.
Well, look, gentlemen, it's been awesome speaking to the both of you, which means that we've come down to our last question. So we'll start with Chris and then go to Kami. So Chris first. If you're to go back 20 years, what advice would you give yourself? What would you tell yourself?
It's always a great question. Everybody has some missteps along the way, and I don't know that I necessarily had mistakes or chose the wrong paths or would do it differently if I had an opportunity to do so, because I think all those were great experiences. Whether it was, I didn't even mention it at the start, but I actually started out in an architecture program in school, and due to a combination of, I don't know, immaturity and inability to handle the subjectivity of an architecture program, I had to basically, it was a do-over. I had to start. I came back home and then regrouped and then went to Milwaukee School of Engineering for an architectural engineering degree. It was a big switch. Yeah, that was a mistake to start off, but I don't know that I would go back and trade that. I think it was a good experience. There's certainly some things that, that was a big financial burden on me because it was, my school was going to be paid for. And then my parents said, nope, you're on your own now. So that was a huge learning lesson. And certainly financially, had I known that ahead of time, I probably would have approached it a little bit differently. But again, I think they were all important steps in getting me to where I am now. But I would say if there's one thing that I would tell myself 20 years ago or even longer is read more. Believe it or not, I think that's one of the things that would have helped me a lot longer. Helped me quicker along the way, because I still to this day don't love reading. I obviously read to do what I need to do, but I look at my kids and they can't put a book down. I have to fight them to go to bed because they want to keep reading their book, and that's a quality I've never had. I think had I instilled that in myself a long time ago, I think I'd be a lot better off, and I probably would have gotten to this point a little bit quicker.
Very interesting. That's
Yeah.
a very unique answer. I love that. Thank you. And Kami, what about you? If you were to go back 20 years, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give to yourself?
I think things have turned out okay, but the one thing I would probably advise myself not to do anymore is worry. The first 15 years in this position, I worried all the time. We always were profitable. We always made great money, but I still worried about it. I still worried about where the next project came from, worried about whether this client is going to be unhappy, worried about whether this employee was going to leave or not. If I look back and I had to learn or give myself an advice or learn not to do something, would be to worry all the time, because that really chisels on your happiness quite a bit. Don't get me wrong. This has been just the experience of a lifetime, creating a company and see it flourish and now it transition to a new generation. But I remember a lot of nights laying in bed worrying about different things. And in retrospect, a lot of them just worked out.
Well,
All
those
right.
are some great insights. I love that, especially not going through transition, right? I love that perspective. So thank you for sharing. Justin?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm more blown away of the worry, because obviously it's natural owner. That's very natural, but we've not heard that. Like, don't worry. Like it's going to be okay. You're going to be good. Or that Chris was, a rebellious 18-year-old. That also is, for me, is from what I know of you, that is like so far from my imagination. So it's amazing to hear that. Oh no, there was a whole.
Well, that's good that I
other life.
apparently have corrected that somehow.
Yes, course corrected for sure. I'm going to throw all your social media and all that fun stuff in the show notes. But if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Visit www.btc.expert. Both of our contact information is under the Teams tab, right? You have our emails and everything else.
And LinkedIn is a great way as well. I try to be a lot more active on there, but I could certainly do a better job. So if more people are reaching out, it gives me more excuse to go on there, I suppose.
There you go. And once this episode's released, you'll have tons of content to push out to your network. So everybody will be reaching out.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's all for us. Is there anything else you want to say to the people before we say goodbye?
Nope.
I think so. I think we've covered a lot.
Cool. This was a blast, as Will had mentioned. And until next time, adios.
Adios.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
Keep building scale.
scale.